On July 15th, 1817, 3 days before she died, in the town of Winchester, a town in the south of England, a town that she had traveled to for access to better medical care, a town important in both Roman and medieval Britain, a town with a beautiful medieval cathedral, Jane Austen dictated a poem. It is not, admittedly, one of the very greatest lyric poems in the Western tradition, but it is highly entertaining and surprisingly medieval. When Winchester races first took their beginning, it is said the good people forgot their old saint, not applying at all for the leave of St. Swithin, and that William of Wykeham's approval was faint. The races, however, were fixed and determined. The company met, and the weather was charming. The lords and the ladies were satined and ermined, and nobody saw any future alarming. But when the old saint was informed of these doings, he made but one spring from his shrine to the roof of the palace, which now lies so sadly in ruins, and then he addresses them all, standing aloof. O subjects rebellious, O venta depraved, when once we are buried, you think we are dead. But behold me immortal. By vice you're enslaved. You have sinned and must suffer. Then further he said, these races and revels and dissolute measures with which you're debasing a neighboring plain, let them stand. You shall meet with your curse in your pleasures. Set off for your course, I'll pursue with my reign. Ye cannot but know my command in July. Henceforth I'll triumph in showing my powers. Shift your race as you will, it shall never be dry. The curse upon Venta is July in showers. This is what she wrote 3 days before she died. The poem sets us in the legendary past. First took their beginning, and it is said, it is an etiological legend, a story about origins. Think of Genesis, which is full of, this is why this well is called this. Why are there July showers in Venta, which is the ancient Roman name for Winchester? Austen's etiological answer is surprisingly medieval. She imagines the long-dead Saint Swithin, a 9th century Anglo-Saxon bishop and the patron saint of Winchester Cathedral, leaping to the roof of the bishop's palace to chastise the irreligious, who in their pursuit of secular pleasure, horse racing, and revels, have forgotten him and their religious duty. They have also ignored the disapproval of William of Wykeham, founder of New College, bishop of Winchester in the 14th century, and renovator of the cathedral. In her last days on earth, Jane Austen wrote a poem referencing 2 spiritual leaders who lived well before the Protestant Reformation. Even the clothing in this poem is medieval. The people are ermined. The snow-white fur of an ermine, or stoat, an animal that resembles a weasel. Isn't he adorable? This fur, right, is a particularly lavish and particularly medieval fabric. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, a poem, right, that our seniors may remember, is full of ermine. Austen died, as I said, 3 days after writing this poem, and her funeral was held in Winchester Cathedral. Winchester Cathedral was a Norman cathedral built in the 11th century and then renovated into Gothic cathedral in the 14th century. Okay. Austen was especially fond of Winchester Cathedral. Here you can see it in an artistic rendering. Seniors, right, look at that vaulted ceiling with its sumptuous, right, and dignified interior. Isn't it lovely? We'll be looking at Gothic cathedrals soon. Austen, in fact, is buried in Winchester, in a church which houses the remains of medieval kings, bishops, and saints. Her eldest brother wrote a poem describing her funeral in that cathedral. Though the poem does praise his sister eventually, he spends a significant amount of the time describing the architecture of the cathedral, with its Gothic tracery and archet with lancet head. So throughout her life, Jane Austen and those close to her were surrounded by, attracted to, and concerned with the Middle Ages. Now, when we picture the Middle Ages, we picture cathedrals and saints, and especially at WCC, Thomas Aquinas and Dante. But popular imagination is most dominated by brave knights and fair ladies falling into danger and into love. We are thinking about medieval romance, that genre of knights and ladies and magic and fairies and giants and dragons and shipwrecks and happy endings. Now, the love in medieval romance comes with rules and expectations and standards and conventions. Think of Francesca in Inferno, who presents a very dark version of this love. Love, Francesca tells Dante, is quick to kindle in the gentle heart. Now note, this love happens quickly. It is like fire that kindles, and it kindles in the gentle heart, the refined heart, the noble heart. This is fancy love for fancy people, obviously not for peasants. And it is conveyed through the eyes, and it demands obedience. Think also of Chaucer's Knight's Tale, Palamon and Arcita, who fall in love with the fair Emilia at first sight, and Palamon, who declares, I knew it were she be woman or goddessa. Right? I don't know if she's a woman or a goddess. Right? The beloved is something divine, a status that elicits reverence, perhaps even worship. And this love is also connected to service. Think of Ferdinand and Miranda in The Tempest. Ferdinand declares, my heart did fly to your service. Ferdinand serves Miranda not by slaying a dragon or a giant or an enemy knight, but by carrying logs. It's one of my favorite acts of service in Shakespeare's corpus. Love is connected to worship and to service. Now, this love has fairly conventional gender rules. The woman is fair, generally the most fairest woman you've ever seen until the next woman that you meet, right? And she is then the most fairest woman, right, that you have ever seen, right? The knight is brave, again, the most bravest knight that you have ever seen until the next knight that you meet, who is then the bravest knight that you have ever seen. And this most bravest of knights renders this most fairest of lady worship and service. She responds, in turn, with faithful love. In The Tempest, strikingly, Miranda is also eager to serve Ferdinand, and the two engage in something of a service off as they seek to outdo the other, right? She says, no, let me carry the logs. He says, no, right, I couldn't possibly. Shakespeare plays with the conventional gender roles, a move that Austen will also make. Now, while Francesca's love ends in tragedy and damnation, medieval romances, especially English ones, unlike those corrupt and tragic continental romances, right, written by the French, are often comedies in which the knight falls in love, grows in virtue, generally through some quest or adventure, and finds happiness with his lady. Think of Dante's love for Beatrice, which leads him on a journey of moral and spiritual transformation, on a quest for the union of God and man. Think of the wife of Bath's tale. Her tale, not her life. Her tale, at least on the surface, roughly follows the structure of a medieval romance. The knight is a flawed human being who must go on a quest to find out what women want. Only after he has actually learned that lesson, with a lot of help, does he find his perfectly joyful, happy ending with a woman who is both fair and faithful. Helen Cooper, a major medieval scholar, argues that romances follow the grand narrative of Scripture. The great age of romance was also the great age of faith, the doctrine of salvation in which the terrible events of the Passion and Crucifixion were made the means by which fallen mankind was restored, and the bliss of heaven once more became possible, received its fullest theological formulation in the 11th and 12th centuries. Romance, with its typical pattern of an opening disruption of a state of order, followed by a period of trial and suffering, even an encounter with death, yet with a final symbolic resurrection and better restoration, offers a secular equivalent to that divine order. Imagine with me a knight who finds and marries the woman he loves, with whom he lives in perfect bliss. But then he goes off adventuring with his fellow knight, his buddy Gawain. He faithfully promises to return home to his wife after a year, but he breaks his promise, unduly influenced by his friend Gawain, who, sidebar, Gawain does not come off well in most medieval romances. Right? Sir Gawain the Green Knight is actually a very unusual depiction of Gawain. Right? Too absorbed in his knightly exploits, right, to return home to the woman that he loves. His wife, unsurprisingly, is not impressed. She demands that he return the magic ring that she gave him and forbids him from coming home. he experiences a kind of fall from an Edenic union and has to suffer trials to once again become worthy of her love. He defeats giants and enemies with the help of his lion sidekick, eventually reconciling himself to his wife. This is the story of Chrétien de Troyes, the knight with the lion. It's a great story, by the way. A story in which joy is disrupted, penitential suffering endured, and restoration achieved. And at the end of the romance, we are told, "Now my lord Yvain is reconciled, and you may believe that in spite of the trouble that he has endured, he was never so happy for anything. All has turned out well at last, for he is beloved and treasured by his lady, and she by him. His troubles no longer are in his mind, for he forgets them all in the joy he feels with his precious wife." The literary genre of the Middle Ages. Romance fell out of favor in the 16th century and the 17th centuries. Protestants disliked its association with Catholicism. They also complained about all of the sex and violence. Renaissance humanists thought its narrative structure inferior to the glories of the classical world. The scientific revolution made its reliance on wonder and magic and the supernatural seem childish. And Cervantes' satirical Don Quixote depicted the knight as out of step with the modern world. But in the 18th century, the standing of the Romance and the Middle Ages as a whole began to change. Once considered barbarous, superstitious, ignorant, and even childlike, the Middle Ages began to inspire interest, first for historians and scholars, and then for artists and authors. Scholarly research into chivalry transformed into imaginative recreation of the worlds of castles and knights and ladies. The mystery and wonder of the medieval world seemed to provide an antidote to the scientific clarity and rational reductionism of the neoclassical period. And the Romance, with its emphasis on the supernatural and the wondrous, offered something that rational classical literature did not. This medieval revival was far-reaching, even influencing the home decor tastes of the rich. In 1749, Horace Walpole, son of England's first prime minister and author of the first Gothic novel, The Castle of Otranto, began transforming his home, Strawberry Hill, into the Gothic style with crenellations, spires, and arched windows. Gothic ruins, particularly the ruins of abbeys in the moonlight, were considered especially beautiful, the object of both painting and poetry. The English landscape was particularly admired, for its many abbey ruins, to a great extent because of the dissolution of the monasteries. The dissolution of the monasteries, was a profound benefit to the picturesque movement. Austen will make fun of this. She herself actually wrote a poem about the ruins of an abbey. It's called Ode to Pity. It doesn't talk about pity at all, but it does talk about an abbey. She's clearly making fun of this convention. Now, Austen herself had no grand estate to deck with Gothic tracery, nor did she write Gothic romances. But the tropes of courtly love and the structure of medieval romance were known to and of great interest to her. In the Q&A, I'm happy to defend and explain in greater detail how Austen's reading exposed her to the Middle Ages and to the medieval romance. For now, I think it's sufficient to say that she encountered it through Shakespeare and Chaucer. But for the purposes of this lecture tonight, I am simply going to assert that she should be understood as part of the medieval revival in the 18th and the 19th centuries. Tonight, I intend to explore Austen's engagement with the romance of the Middle Ages. I'm especially interested in three aspects of that engagement. 1, the convention of courtly love. 2, a narrative structure shaped by a benevolent providence. And 3, the virtue of romance. So, convention, structure, and romance. Convention, structure, and virtue. And I'm primarily interested in 2 of Austen's novels. Emma, published in 1815, and even more the focus of tonight's talk, Persuasion, published in December of 1817, 6 months after Austen's death. I will argue that Austen's vision of love is influenced by the medieval chivalric tradition, with its emphasis on humble service and worship, with its call to courage and constancy. However, she does not simply adopt that tradition whole cloth. Courtly love may deny female rationality and virtue. After all that goddess stuff, Austen realizes, might go to a woman's head, engendering pride. But despite its danger, Austen believes that service and worship are necessary ingredients for love. However, that service and worship do not just flow from the knight to the lady. Both lady and knight worship and serve each other. Both Austen's heroes and heroines are questing after genuine love and ultimately happiness, but they cannot complete that quest without the aid of a generous Providence who rescues and redeems. And for Austen, romance is not simply the conventions of love or a narrative structure, but a virtue that encourages deep attachment, courageous action, and trust in Providence. At the end, I will take up the challenge that Austen's irony presents to my argument, contending that Austen is a capacious author whose ironic art acknowledges both romantic ideals and practical experience, a balance that itself arises from the ironic theology that she shares with the medieval tradition. Jane Austen's medievalism, then, is not simply romantic, it is ironic. Austen writes ironic providential romances that unite the realistic and the romantic, the practical and the ideal. But first, the conventions of courtly love and its dangers. Do not consider me now as an elegant female intending to plague you, but as a rational creature speaking the truth from her heart. Elizabeth Bennet, the heroine of Pride and Prejudice, pleads with Mr. Collins, responding to his truly dreadful proposal when he simply will not accept her no. This exchange between Elizabeth and Mr. Collins encapsulates much of Austen's concern about courtly love's elevation of the lady. The lady becomes not a real person, a rational creature who speaks truth, but some exotic other. In Persuasion, Captain Wentworth, the novel's hero, is fussy about having women on board his ship because he believes he could never provide the luxurious comfort that he believes they deserve. Are they women or are they goddesses? His sister, Mrs. Croft, is having none of it, and she responds, "I hate to hear you talking so like a fine gentleman, and as if women were all fine ladies instead of rational creatures. We none of us expect to be in smooth waters all our days." Courtly elevation may deny the full humanity of women as rational creatures who speak from the heart and who can endure the trials of life. Courtly elevation may also lead to pride. Take, for example, Emma Woodhouse, the heroine of the revealingly titled Emma. She is handsome, clever, and rich, the most socially and financially secure of Austen's heroines, which is quite remarkable. All Austen heroines have money problems, but not Emma. But Emma faces other dangers. She faces the power of having rather too much her own way and a disposition to think a little too well of herself. Power and pride. These are Emma's problems, and in part they are chivalric problems. She is the elevated lady, worshipped and served by the men around her. Austen is aware that a diet of constant flattery and worship is not especially good for a lady's moral constitution. Emma's greatest moral failure in the novel comes when she speaks cruelly to a kind, poor, and admittedly tiresomely talkative woman. And this insult comes in the midst of a flirtatious flattery from a young man, and is immediately followed by another man who implies that Emma is perfect. Only the aptly and kind of obviously named Mr. Knightley points out her mistake. Indeed, his courageous speech, is in fact chivalric service. He does not rescue Emma from a giant, but he does draw her attention to her moral failings. Emma does come to see her pride and recognize the limits of her power. She is not an infallible interpreter of reality, despite her belief, nor can she control the lives of those around her, despite her best attempts. By the end of the novel, she displays the worshipful reverence and humble service characteristic of the knight. Ladies in medieval romance tend to be perfect, perfectly beautiful and perfectly virtuous. They are morally static. Austen's women are more like the knights who grow in virtue and offer humble service to their beloved. Emma is not the perfect, peerless lady who elevates her beloved. Instead, she is the knight, elevated by love, who by the end of the novel can admit her own flaws, her own imperfections, and even the superiority of her beloved. These are remarkable admissions from a young woman who is used to having her own way and thinking well of herself. They are the admissions of the chivalric lover who hopes to become worthy of his lady. But Mr. Knightley does not treat her with proud condescension. He also sees her with the eyes of love as his perfect lady. This sweetest and best of all creatures, faultless in spite of all of her faults, of which I am very much aware. This is a remarkable description, given how frequently Mr. Knightley has criticized Emma throughout the novel. And he confesses to her, "I have blamed you and lectured you, and you have borne it as no other woman in England would have borne it." Emma is exceptional, at least to Mr. Knightley. I think she's pretty great, too. Emma thinks that Mr. Knightley is more worthy than she is. He thinks she is perfect. Austen astutely critiques courtly love, recognizing the danger of treating women as fine ladies rather than rational creatures, and the temptation to pride. But she does not wholly dismiss the insights of the medieval tradition. Austen sees that humble service and worship are essential to love, but she does not see service and worship flowing one way. Both the knight and the lady grow in virtue and serve each other. Both are capable of courage and constancy. Courtly love, when released from its strict gender roles, enables happy love, a mutual exchange of that submission so central to the medieval tradition. I'd like to look at one more example of Austen's treatment of courtly love and her propensity to give to her women the role of knight. Anne Elliot, the heroine of Persuasion, was engaged at the age of 19 to the bold and adventurous Frederick Wentworth. But soon Anne is persuaded by her dear friend, Lady Russell, to give up the engagement for worldly and prudential reasons. Think of Yvain being persuaded by Gawain to not return home and fulfill his own promise. Wentworth leaves for sea, hurt and angry. 7 years later, the two are unexpectedly reunited. It is not a romantic union. Wentworth is distant and formal. Anne seems so changed. In many ways, Wentworth embodies the characteristics of the knight. He is courageous and confident. He has made his fortune at sea. He is a leader of men. He does experience the moral transformation of the knight, eventually confessing to angry pride. But Anne does not remain the static, refined lady. In the novel, the greatest acts of knightly service and knightly courage belong to her. During a memorable trip to the seaside town of Lyme, a young girl, Louisa Musgrove, with whom Captain Wentworth has been flirting, falls off a wall. It's kind of her fault. The brave captain, the man of action and resolution and firmness, finds himself powerless. Instead, it is Anne who takes charge. Captain Wentworth is in shock. He, staggering against the wall for his support, exclaimed in the bitterest agony, "Oh God, her father and mother." Meanwhile, Anne calls for a surgeon and suggests that they carry Louisa to a nearby inn. Anne, attending with all the strength and zeal and thought which instinct supplied, tended to Henrietta, still tried at intervals to suggest comfort for the others, tried to quiet Mary, to animate Charles, to assuage the feelings of Captain Wentworth. Both seemed to look at her for directions. Now here, Anne is not trying to win Wentworth back, but she does offer some version of chivalric service, acting with strength and zeal and thought. Later in the novel, when Anne and Wentworth are together in Bath, she courageously speaks out, defending the constancy of women against a literary tradition which tends to emphasize female inconstancy. Anne, channeling the wife of Bath, points out that men have had the power of the pen far more than women, so it is no surprise that literature tends to denigrate women. Anne, so often silent and overlooked by her family, courageously speaks out and defends female constancy. This defense, which Wentworth overhears, leads him to propose. Emma and Mr. Knightley, Anne and Wentworth, defiance of gender norms, embody the best of the courtly love tradition, courage and constancy, and worship and service. Austen realizes the danger of this convention, but she also believes that it gets at real truths about love. Romantic love transformed into mutual service and worship is essential for marital happiness. Yet none of her heroes and heroines obtain the fulfillment of courtly love or romantic happiness on their own. Austen's medievalism, then, is not simply in her treatment of love. It is in her narrative structure. a structure that is profoundly shaped by the Christian story and the belief in the generous care of Providence, who graciously delivers from danger and provides happiness. Captain Wentworth, as I have mentioned already, embodies the virtues of the knight. He has adventured far and served bravely at sea. But at home, in the affairs of the heart, he cannot save himself. After Louisa falls from the wall, Wentworth realizes, though he is not technically engaged to her, he kind of is because a lot of other people think that he is. So he's stuck. Right? He is duty-bound. He must marry her. He is an honorable man. But he also realizes that he really actually loves Anne, and in fact that he has loved Anne all along and has never stopped loving her. But he is now trapped. He is not at liberty. He is bound to Louisa. This knightly captain, a man of action and decision, of firmness and resolution, cannot save himself from an undesirable engagement to a nice, but rather mediocre young woman. Instead, he is stuck, lamenting the blindness of his own pride and the blunders of his own calculations, till at once released from Louisa by the astonishing and felicitous intelligence of her engagement to another man. This astonishing, wondrous news frees him. Now he can act. He heads to Bath in pursuit of Anne. But that action is only possible because of his gracious deliverance, and Anne comes to him as a gift that he does not deserve. At the end of the novel, in the last direct speech in the whole of the work, he tells Anne, "I have been used to the gratification of believing myself to earn every blessing that I enjoyed. I have valued myself on honorable toils and just rewards. Like other great men under reverses," he added with a smile, "I must endeavor to subdue my mind to my fortune. I must learn to brook being happier than I deserve." Something of a self-made man, Wentworth realizes that he cannot fully make himself. Life is more than just rewards for honorable toil. It is also being happier than one deserves. Dante cannot rescue himself. He needs the gracious intervention of a whole lot of women, Mary, Lucy, and Beatrice. The knight and the wife of Bath's tale cannot save himself. The old hag appears to him and offers to tell him what women want. Palamon and Emilia in the Knight's Tale cannot bring about their happy ending without the divinely arranged death of Arcita, happens at a very convenient moment, and also the really long lectures from Theseus. Ferdinand and Miranda cannot come together without Prospero, who himself cannot bring about his plan without the gracious intervention of Providence. In romance, the characters can be courageous and beautiful and virtuous. They have agency and can grow, but they are not all-powerful. So we have seen Austen's adaptation and transformation of romantic love and her debt to romantic narrative structure. In the end, however, romance for Austen is not simply a convention of love or even a narrative structure. It is a virtue, perhaps a vision of the world, a vision that unites human effort and trust in Providence. In a very famous passage at the beginning of Persuasion, Austen writes, "How eloquent could Anne Elliot have been? How eloquent, at least, were her wishes on the side of early warm attachment and a cheerful confidence in futurity against that over-anxious caution which seems to insult exertion and distrust Providence. She had been forced into prudence in her youth. She learned romance as she grew older, the natural sequel of an unnatural beginning." Romance here is on the side of warm attachment and cheerful confidence, and on the side of Providence. The romance Anne learns is not a literary genre or even an emotional state, but a paradoxical virtue comprised of human effort and divine intervention. It blends love and trust, deep love for another, warm attachment, and trust in God's future provision, cheerful confidence. Romance depends on the warmth of the human heart and the goodness of Providence. The virtue of romance also includes courage, the courage to respond to the opportunities Providence provides, the courage that we see Anne exercise when she takes charge after Louisa's fall, and when she speaks about female constancy, or the enterprise that Captain Wentworth displays when he sets off for Bath after he learns about Louisa's engagement. The vice opposed to romance is over-anxious caution or prudence. Prudence here is not a virtue that allows one to judge wisely in particular situations, but rather a calculating virtue connected to coldness and fear. Prudence opposes both human exertion and trust in God. In losing Wentworth, Anne has learned the value of courageous action, deep love, and divine provision. Through her novels, Austen shares that virtue with her readers. Now, neither Anne nor Austen is thinking of romance as a literary genre in this passage. Anne did not start reading Middle English romances after breaking off her engagement to Wentworth. But the virtue of romance that she learns is at the heart of the romantic literary genre, at least those that end happily. It is a genre governed by beneficent providence, a genre in which cheerful confidence in futurity is rewarded with perfect happiness, a genre that celebrates warm attachment and courageous exertion. Anne's lessons in romance is the lesson of the providential romances of the Middle Ages. And that virtue makes possible perfect happiness, an ending typical of medieval romance. Romance is the realm of the ideal heroes and heroines, ideal love, ideal marriage, ideal happiness. At the end of the Knight's Tale, we are told, "For now is Palamon all well, living in blissa, in riches and in hela, and Emilia him loveth so tenderly, and his service so gently, that never was there no word in between of jealousy or any other tina." Right? Palamon is doing really well, right? He is all well, completely well. He is living in bliss, in riches, and in health, the whole package. And Emily also loves him very tenderly, and he serves her so gently, right? So nobly, so beautifully, so well. That there was never any word between them of jealousy or any other strife. The perfectly blissful, rich, and healthy Palamon and Emilia never jealously or fretfully snap at one another. The wife of Bath tells us that the knight and his lady, and thus live unto her lives enda in perfect joy. Thus they live all the way to the end of their lives in absolutely perfect joy. At the end of Emma, we hear of the perfect happiness of the union. Austen's heroes and heroines grow in chivalric humility and courage and find a perfectly happy ending wrought by their own exertion and by the goodness of Providence, all while instructing us as readers in the virtue of romance. Romantic, right? But Austen does something funny. In the chapter immediately after Wentworth acknowledges a happiness that he does not deserve, the narrator writes, "When any two young people take it into their heads to marry, they are pretty sure by perseverance to carry their point, be they ever so poor, or ever so imprudent, or ever so little likely to be necessary to each other's ultimate comfort." This may be bad morality to conclude with, but I believe it to be truth. And if such parties succeed, how should a Captain Wentworth and an Anne Elliot, with the advantage of maturity of mind, consciousness of right, and one independent fortune between them, fail of bearing down every opposition? This is very strange. We have just had a beautiful reunion between two deeply admirable people who have matured and possess courage and constancy. And then Austen decides to remind us of less admirable young people who are poor or imprudent or unnecessary to each other's comfort. She offers the following moral. Young people who want to get married, get married. This may be bad morality, the narrator remarks, but it is true. Austen is not advocating that any two young people who take it into their heads should get married, but she realizes that they do, and they will. She is too much of a realist to present Anne and Wentworth as the norm. But even as she contrasts their maturity and virtue to any two young people, she includes their one independent fortune as a point in their favor. They have good reason to get married: maturity, virtue, and money. Anne, who values an affectionate heart, confidence in the future, and trust in Providence, and who is the recipient of the most passionately romantic declaration of love in Austen's canon, is able to marry in part because her lover has more money than he had when they were first engaged. Maturity and moral conviction are unromantically and ironically juxtaposed with money. This irony seems to undermine the virtue of romance and smacks of worldly prudence. And Austen routinely juxtaposes the ideal and the practical. One of my personal favorite examples of this juxtaposition comes in Sense and Sensibility, when we are told that one of the happiest couples in the world had in fact nothing to wish for but the marriage of a friend and a sister and rather better pasturage for their cows. This sentence functions as a kind of metonymy for Austen's ability to juxtapose ideal love and mundane practicality, the superlative happiest and then the ordinary cows. It's hard to imagine Dante and Beatrice fretting about cows. Does this juxtaposition undermine Austen's romanticism? Does her inclusion of imperfection and practicalities expose the impossibility or even critique the falseness of romantic ideals? Austen does make fun and seriously critique absurd idealism. Her heroes and heroines do not usually fall in love at first sight. In fact, readers of Austen are often deeply disappointed by her romantic deflation and her romantic reticence. After Mr. Knightley's proposal, instead of Emma's impassioned response, we get, what did she say? Just what she ought, of course. A lady always does. It's even worse in Mansfield Park, a novel I haven't yet mentioned. Austen refuses to narrate any scenes of love between the hero and the heroine, and instead simply tells us, I only entreat everybody to believe that exactly the time when it was quite natural that it should be so, and not a week earlier, Edmund, the hero, did cease to care about Miss Crawford, the woman he thought he loved, and become as anxious to marry Fanny, the heroine, as Fanny herself could desire. That's great. Austen's irony certainly separates her from the typical medieval romance, which tends to avoid practical matters like money and cows, and tends to avoid ironic deflation of romantic highs of perfect love and joyous happiness. Think of Palamon and Emma Leah. No jealousy and no strife. Perfect joy for the rest of their lives. Let me be clear here. Austen is not writing exclusively in the romance genre. She even makes fun of the genre, especially the romances of her own era, which denied the messy and mundane realities of love. She sees the dangers of blind, excessive romantic passion. She is a satirist, a moralist, an observer of human foibles and flaws, of evils and injustices of society. There is an edge, a darkness, even a bitterness to her that is often missed in modern adaptations. Some of her novels are darker than others. She is not a sappy sentimentalist. She knows that many marriages are unhappy, even abusive, or simply mediocre. She does not naively believe that love conquers all. She knows that people need money. She knows that people often marry for money. She is a novelist of the ordinary, the practical, the experienced. But she juxtaposes that vision with and to a rich romantic vision, the one I've been describing in this lecture. Now, ironic juxtaposition can certainly be corrosive. And for some modern thinkers, irony deconstructs every assertion of absolute truth. And at times, Austen is deconstructing ideals, especially ideals she finds harmful and absurd and false to human nature and experience. But she is not at war with all ideals. Irony does not always deconstruct. Marvin Mudrick, a rather bleak and dour Austen critic, calls irony the discoverer and explorer of incongruities. Such incongruities may be actual contradictions. For Marianne Dashwood of Sense and Sensibility, second attachments are impossible even though she herself is a child of a second marriage. She herself will, of course, end up in a marriage which is a second attachment. But irony does more than just discover contradictory incongruities. Irony, Anthony Esolen writes, reveals order where randomness was expected, or complexity and subtlety where simplicity was expected. Irony may incongruously reveal order in apparent randomness, goodness in what appears evil. According to Esolen, irony commonly is used to exalt rather than undermine. It can stun us with wonder and raise our eyes to behold a truth we had missed. All kinds of unsuspected truths, particularly those combined in paradoxes, await our attention. Might Austen's irony, at least at times, be of this sort? And might her irony, as well as her romance, also belong to the Middle Ages? Consider Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. It opens with the stately romance of the knight, juxtaposed with and followed by the bawdy fabliau of the miller. Refined courtly love juxtaposed with very straightforward sexual desire. The Wife of Bath's tale is also full of ironic juxtaposition. The first word that she speaks is experience. And boy, has she had experience, sexual and spiritual. And the experience of the power struggles between men and women. Yet, this woman of experience tells a seemingly idealistic tale at odds with her own life. And then, after her romantic tale, after she describes the perfect joy of the knight and his wife, she herself intrudes in the middle of the line, literally in the middle of a line, to pray for young husbands who are fresh in bed, the grace to outlive them, short lives for those men who will not submit to their wives, and divinely inflicted plague on miserly men. Underclassmen, you have so much to look forward to. Sexual earthiness and gender power struggles intrude into romantic idealism. And Chaucer does not quickly resolve these ironic juxtapositions. Does the experience of the Wife of Bath suggest that the ideal love in her tale is false? I don't think so. Chaucer's irony arises from a theological and anthropological irony, very much alive in the Middle Ages. Scholar Edmund Rees states, medieval irony stemmed from man's recognition of his place in the cosmos. It was not at all a challenge to God, but rather an acceptance of man's own inadequacy. Man is inadequate, unable to understand providence or love, and because of his sin, undeserving of the love that providence shows. Yet he is a recipient of that love. Sophomores, think of the opening of the Confessions, which emphasizes man's sinfulness and smallness, but also his wild desire to praise a God who both punishes man's pride and also makes man for himself. Man is also an ironic disjunct in his very nature, because man is both body and soul. We might even say hylomorphic unity. He is both enmeshed in the material world and capable of transcending mere materialism. He longs for both material comfort and spiritual bliss. Austen shares this ironic vision of man. She sees that man is not simply a soul seeking some sublime and abstract love, but also a body which needs an independent fortune and cows. She tempers her ideals with keen observations about experience. Austen's irony deepens her romance, allowing her to present a richer vision of reality, a reality that includes the ideal and the practical. Austen's medievalism is not simply romantic. It runs deeper. She shares a vision of the world that is alive to the ironic paradox of human nature and leaves room for both romance and realism. Her vision is also alive to the irony of providence. The hidden order that Esselin speaks of may in fact be the sneakiness of providence. In Genesis, Joseph tells his brothers, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive." On one level, human intention. On another level, providential plan. Providence works through a surprising juxtaposition of evil and good. In a medieval romance, a wicked father might banish his daughter to the sea, where she perilously drifts, only to come to shore and find her true love, who then has an unfortunately evil mother who sends her out to sea for a second time. But everything ends perfectly right in the end. Everyone is happy, and her son becomes the emperor of Rome. So, fatherly evil leads to love. Okay? Providence often works in secret behind the scenes. Freshmen, consider the way Athena works behind the scenes for Odysseus' good. The way that she used laundry to engineer the meeting between Nausicaa and Odysseus. You guys know I love laundry. On one level, human practicality and desire. On another level, divine ordering. Sophomores, consider the sneakiness of providence all throughout the Confessions, as God uses Augustine's disordered desires to guide his restless heart to rest. Dante, in the dark woods, is initially completely and totally oblivious to the great heavenly game of telephone played by the three ladies conspiring to save him. Austen's Persuasion is rife with such providential irony and sneakiness. Take just one example. Austen's father, Sir Walter, cannot pay his bills. Consequently, he experiences a kind of fall and expulsion from the garden of his ancestral estate, which he must rent out to strangers. At the end of the novel, Austen describes Sir Walter as a foolish spendthrift baronet who had not the principle or sense enough to maintain himself in the situation in which Providence had placed him. Sir Walter fails to respond to the generosity of Providence, but that failure plays a role in his daughter finding happiness because, of all the tenants in England, he happens to rent to the sister of Anne's former lover, who miraculously comes back into her life. The fall of the father enables the rise of the daughter. Sir Walter's evil is used for good. Austen's romances are providential, but the Christian view of providence makes possible both irony and romance. It supplies an order that is not completely known to man, an order that can be revealed at surprising moments, and that benevolently works good for the virtuous, restoring that which seemed irrevocably lost. Providential aid and heroic virtue are both possible, despite their seeming opposition. Providence is incongruously generous to fallen man, and man, that creation of providence, is an ironic incongruity himself, a soul that can contemplate divine truth, and a body that needs to be supported by pasturage for his cows. Providence makes irony possible. Austen writes ironic providential romances. Through her irony, she's not destabilizing the ordered cosmos that she believes in. Rather, she is reflecting that order through her irony. Certainly, she does employ her irony as an attack against vice and social injustice, and the emotional excess and ontological folly of a superficial brand of romance. But her attacks rely on a stable order that individuals and societies have failed to live up to. Her irony also reveals the paradoxes essential to providential Christianity, as flawed human beings find temporal happiness through a providence that does not enslave but liberates. All novelists, Flannery O'Connor declares, are fundamentally seekers and describers of the real, but the realism of each novelist will depend on his view of the ultimate reaches of reality. The real may go beyond the ordinary and into the extraordinary. It may go beyond the imperfect to the ideal. It may include the juxtaposition of those seeming contraries that ultimately harmonize in divine providence. Austen's reality certainly includes selfish schemers, hapless fools, and heartless clerics. It includes unhappy marriages. It also includes the financial woes of young, attractive women. And it includes a clear-eyed acknowledgement that men and women cannot live on love alone. It includes money and livestock. But it also includes a conviction of the unity of virtue and happiness and of the gracious intervention of providence. Medieval romances often end with a prayer. The author prays for his salvation and the salvation of his readers. One of my favorite prayers, the author describes the many nights that he has stayed up late working on his story. The wife of Bath's wish for nubile young lovers is actually a prayer, clearly an ironic version of the medieval convention. I would also like to end this lecture with a prayer, one of Austen's. Give us, she prays, grace to attain that temper of forbearance and patience, which, while it prepares us for the spiritual happiness of the life to come, will secure to us the best enjoyment of what this world can give. Austen's prayer reveals her understanding of grace and its relationship to virtue. Through grace, we attain the virtues of forbearance and patience, virtues that prepare us for spiritual happiness. For Austen, the life to come is real and is characterized by happiness, and that she makes the request at all indicates her trust that providence cares for human happiness. It is a suitable subject for prayer. But happiness is not an exclusively heavenly matter, as Aristotle, so firmly wants to assert. There is also the best enjoyment of what this world can give. And in the grammar of her prayer, spiritual happiness comes in a clausal aside introduced by the subordinate conjunction while. The whole sentence, however, culminates in the best enjoyment of what this world can give. You thought you were going to get away from grammar. While her prayer intimates the superiority of the life to come over this world, Austen's primary concern, grammatically and artistically, is with present enjoyment. What, her novels ask, makes for a good life here in this world? This concern for happiness also situates Austen in the medieval tradition, which sees happiness as the greatest good. As Lady Philosophy tells Boethius, what all men want, although they seek it by different routes and through different activities, is to be happy. That is the summum bonum, the supreme good, the one that leaves room for no others. For if there were anything further to want, it could not be the highest good. The desire for happiness is inborn, instinctive in the minds of men, but they are led astray by false ideas of the good. Austen, too, sees men as seeking after happiness, and she sees the many paths we take pursuing false ideals of the good. Like Boethius, she understands that true fulfillment of our desire for happiness is found in God. But she is keenly interested in how we live our lives in this world. What is the true path for temporal happiness? What kind of love best leads to happiness? What role does providence play in happiness? How do we balance practical needs and ideal aspirations? I believe that attending to Austen's medievalism helps us better understand her vision of the best enjoyment of what this world can give. Her novels offer a vision of happiness that she believes is best, a vision that takes the best of courtly love, applies its virtues to both men and women, acknowledges the goodness of providence and the efficacy of human action, and calls human beings to the virtue of romance while acknowledging the messiness of experience and the practical demands of human embodiment. She is a remarkable lady philosophy. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for questions, and I'll bring the microphone around, but since I have it, I'll take advantage of that and ask a question. Could you talk about other novels written during Jane Austen's life and whether they fit into this trend of looking back to the medieval period, and also whether whether Jane Austen is doing something unique in the way that she's going back to romance?
Yes, I think she is doing something unique in her incisive critique and transformation of the tradition. She is not doing anything unique by going back to the Middle Ages, right, or to the medieval courtly love tradition at all. So the romances that she's reading in her own era are profoundly shaped by the romance. So I mentioned Horace Walpole and the Castle of Otranto, which is the first Gothic novel, the first Gothic romance. It kind of kickstarts this whole craze in England of writing stories about the medieval times. Right? Walpole invents this whole narrator and translator. There's layers upon layers, right, of narrative mediation there, but he's writing about the Middle Ages. So that kind of begins this trend, and then we see authors like Anne Radcliffe, who was very, very popular in Austen's day, writing basically medieval romances. Sometimes Radcliffe's novels are set maybe in the 1500s, but in the 1500s, the character will always go to some spooky medieval ruin. Right? Generally, the moon is out. The character has some kind of like sentimental and melancholy feelings about the moon and the castle, right? And imagines maybe a knight riding across the plain type of a thing there. Right, so that's in Radcliffe's novels. We've got Sir Walter Scott, who is writing. Austen died before Ivanhoe comes out, but she would have read some of the Waverley novels, Marmion and the Lady of the Lake, and all of those are extremely medieval. Scott is writing about minstrels and knights and ladies. So it's all over the literature that she is reading, and it's all over the novels that she is reading.
Thank you, Dr. Schubert. I was wondering if you could expand a little more on the role of trust in Austen's work. Is it a type of trust in your own desires and yourself? Is it a trust in providence that you will have enough cows? And how does that kind of play out in making her work unique? And how does that work in tandem with the medieval literature?
Yeah. So particularly in Persuasion, where we see that Anne, as a young woman at the age of 19, fails to exercise trust, that Providence cares for her, loves for her, and wills her good. Maybe that's a lot to ask for a 19-year-old, but this is kind of the particular failure, right? There's this kind of sense that things in this life are just not going to work out, and so what one must do, right, is to protect oneself, especially economically protect oneself. So it's kind of a risky venture for her to marry Wentworth. He's actually not successful when she first meets him. I mean, he's not a failure yet. He just has not actually been tested or proved, right? So it would have been an act of trust on her part to say, I will marry this man, and we will see what happens, or we will see where Providence takes us, right? And I will step out courageously in trust. And so instead, she makes the decision, the prudential decision, to protect herself, right? I think protect her own economic standing, but also to respect her friend, her very close friend. So I don't want to simplify Anne's motives there. Right? So when she's talking about learning trust, I think that Anne she is realizing that Providence wills her good, and that Providence directs and oversees the course of events, and that even if things don't look some particular way, right, there is still cause for hope in the future. And maybe that might be the best way to articulate how the trust works there, is her sense that she can hope for the future instead of being afraid of what is to come. Or even feeling a kind of despair, which she does get close to in the novel, right? She does get close to a kind of despair. There's a moment at the very end of the novel, before Wentworth has declared his love, Anne is walking down the streets of Bath, and she's thinking to herself, and she thinks, I will love Wentworth forever, right? Eternal love, forever and ever, even if we never actually come together. And I actually do think that that's kind of a profound act of trust on her part, because she says she's not despairing. She's not I am going to mope around for the rest of my life loving this man. She says, I love him forever, and this may not work out, but I trust in the goodness of love there, right? So it's an incredible act. It's an incredible act, right, I think, of trust there. And I do think that Persuasion is the most attentive to the role of Providence. Providence is mentioned 3 times in Persuasion, which is unusual, right, for Austen there. But I think that it's her last full novel, and I think she herself, has come to this very mature place in her own trust in providence. In some of her other novels, there's just a greater sense of the brokenness of the world. It's there in Persuasion too.
Thank you, Dr. Schubert. I'm a little confused about the modern novels.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like, besides maybe Crime and Punishment, where there's both the ideal and sort of the base mixed together. Like, Sonia was a prostitute, but then she also saves Raskolnikov in a way. But it seems like with the later on novels, there's not really that ideal present. Most of them, if there is an ideal, it's in the very low and base things, whereas Austen mainly separates them, maybe? Should we sort of abandon modern novels and go back to this romance? Or what do we make of the novels?
Are you thinking of contemporary novels or?
Yeah, maybe
modern novels?
mainly Madame Bovary and
Okay.
Ivan Illich. Yeah.
Yeah, really, this was a question about Madame Bovary. Yeah. No, I do not think we should abandon Madame Bovary, ever. No. Think of Don Quixote, right? So Don Quixote, which is sort of the origin of the modern novel. It's actually not the origin of the novel. We have the novel, right, in the Greek and the Roman tradition. But Don Quixote is kind of the founding modern novel. And that is a novel which is obviously different interpretations, right? But it is a novel, I think, that can be read as pointing out the utter impracticality of ideals and the way that our ideals might actually destroy us, right, or kill us in the end. And I think the modern novel in many ways, right, is born out of that concern, which I think is a very valid and legitimate concern to have, right? Again, think of Madame Bovary, right? Emma's problem, many problems, but right, one of Emma's problems is that she just has these absolutely absurd ideals about how love should work and what her ideal man is. He's this amazing, impressive hunter, but also a really deep, refined poet who loves to talk about the sea, even though neither of them have actually been to the sea. Okay. Right. So she, and that relentless pursuit for the ideal in Emma actually makes it impossible for her to live in this world. So I think that's a profoundly important and valuable lesson to learn, right? And I think that Austen herself is aware of that too. So a character like Marianne Dashwood is not an Emma Bovary. Austen is doing the Emma Bovary thing before Flaubert is, right? But she doesn't end up like Emma. But she has these ideals that are actually just disconnected from the real, right, and from the reality of the human heart, the complexity of the human heart. And Marianne has to learn to put those ideals to death. Right? But I don't think that then means, certainly for Austen, that then there are no ideals to live up to. It's just what kind of ideals? Are those ideals rooted in reality? And then make sure, right, that you are holding those ideals, right, in a kind of fruitful tension with just the messy realities of experience. And that is just not something that Emma Bovary can do, right? Emma just cannot deal with mud, right? The beggar, with just her daughter, right? She cannot actually handle the realities, right, of this world. And that's the thing, right, that actually, rather than I think fundamentally in the end destroys her.
Thank you, Dr. Schubert. You talk about warm attachment as being part of what Jane Austen values. In her book, she often focuses a lot on the rational component of love as well as an emotional, especially Marianne being an example of not just following your emotions with love. Could you talk about what Austen means by that warm attachment?
Yeah, I think contrasting Marianne and Anne might be helpful here. So Marianne has an ardent heart, right? And she gives that heart to Willoughby, who is very undeserving, right, of that love and of that attachment. And maybe her falling in love with him or kind of having a crush on him. She's very young, right? She's like 17 years old, right? She's so young. Maybe that is not right, irrational in and of itself, but then she, from Austen's perspective, she defies all prudential restraints, right? Does not exercise right, any kind of prudential judgment, makes no attempt to actually protect herself, right, in any kind of way, and really does expose herself to profound danger because of that. And then I think Marianne's absolutism too, right? There's a sort of irrationality. I mean, Marianne, right, she's denying actual evidence in front of her. The evidence in front of her, right, is that her own parents are in a second marriage. And, well, her father's dead when the novel opens, but it sounds like they were very happy. So Marianne is actually denying the evidence in front of her, which I think is a profoundly irrational move to make there. Yeah, I think with Anne there, Austen, I think sometimes Austen can come across as very cold, right? And with Anne, I think that Austen is actually celebrating the warmth of love, but it is a love grounded in right recognition of the virtue of the beloved. It's a love that's grounded in right recognition of one's own virtue too. Like when Anne decides that she loves Wentworth and is going to love him forever and ever, right? Eternal love. I think Austen making fun of her just a little bit. Right? But when she decides that she's going to love him forever and forever, she's gone through so much maturation, right? That moment, I think, in terms of her growth in virtue, right, enables her to have that kind of warm attachment there. I think another moment after Emma goes through her whole journey and she's reflecting, she realizes that Harriet is in love with Mr. Knightley. Maybe she herself won't marry him or won't be able to marry him. She's very distressed about this, but she has the rational comfort that she has grown in virtue and that she will commit herself to rational self-improvement for the rest of her life. But it's kind of a cold comfort there. And in fact, that I think Austen realizes that for really, I think the full completion of human virtue, you need to have warm attachment. You need to have a heart that is capable of love. That is actually part of what it is to be a rational creature, I think, for her, is to have the capacity to deeply love, but coming from, enhanced by, and served by one's own virtue with the recognition of the virtue of the beloved there. And then, not allowing your emotions to overwhelm prudential judgments of virtue, but that doesn't mean coldness.
Thank you, Dr. Schubert. I want to ask about...
Tocqueville?
No.
Okay.
Aristotle. No. Austen mania and the reception history of Austen. Do you have some profound scholarly opinion about the significance of how popular Austen remains? Was there some down and then up that we are living through, and what do you make of that? I ask this question because I'm struck by how deeply a Christian reading of Austen you've given in Conversation with Providence and Human Happiness and all of that. And what am I supposed to think of the fact that Austen's novels remain on the shelves and there's a million adaptations of movies and miniseries of Austen? Is there something that you make of that given the way in which you read her novels?
I think, like Shakespeare, Austen is infinitely universal and infinitely adaptable. Okay. Because we have so many right, adaptations of Shakespeare that are not necessarily connected right to, or not right set in Renaissance England, right, or normally right in Italy, not actually right set in the original historical period. So I think something about their narrative, their ability to represent the human heart and the complexity of human character and growth and maturation, I think speaks to right too many different times and many different eras. I think that's part of her appeal. Honestly, is that there is this kind of adaptability about her. And in terms of the history of Austen reception, she was getting some traction in her time. She dies, kind of falls out of favor a little bit, except for in America, where she's beloved. And that kind of then comes back into England. And there's a period in, I think, the end of the 19th century and into the early 20th century where there is this kind of cloying sort of Austen mania of like, now we're going to go around and have tea and kind of romanticize this past era because we've just been through World War I and that was really horrific, and Austen represents this kind of older and more serene and peaceful era. And then you have in the mid-20th century D.W. Harding, who comes out and says, actually, Austen was full of regulated hatred. All right? She just hated everyone that she was writing about. That, I think, is a little bit much, but she does, there is hatred, right? There is, I think, regulated hatred in the novels. Right? But that really that kind of starts this reevaluation of Austen as not just, oh, the like cosplay girl, right? But right, actually Austen as the biting satirist, and then you do get kind of feminist right appreciations of Austen, sort of seeing that she's not just again writing kind of domestic novels, but she's actually very seriously engaged with the politics and the theology, right, and the literature of her own time, right? And anyways, all that to say, I think part of the standing that she has is connected to that reevaluation of her, even if people aren't aware of it. I think that it just give, she's not just the kind of, right, cloying and sappy sentimentalist. There is something more here. But she does sort of have the cosplay appeal, right? I think, right, in our era. Of a kind of sense of refinement and of a world calmer and maybe more luxurious and simpler than ours is. You know. I will also say that her Christianity is very subtle, right? It's so subtle. There's so many scholars who are like, is she Christian or is she not? She doesn't mention Jesus, right? Probably right, she's not. No one gives a long lecture in theology. Definitely not a Christian there. Also, Austen was sometimes kind of a mean person. So, right? She has a fat joke, right? Like, right, she does, right? In Persuasion. It's really it's a pretty vicious joke. Right, so, right, she's kind of savage and vicious, so clearly, right, she can't be a Christian. I mean, I think someone like G.K. Chesterton kind of misses this in Austen as well. It's easy to miss because it's so subtle. I think because it's so interwoven into the very fabric of her cosmos that right, she doesn't need to make it explicit. Also, she is a 18th, 19th century Protestant, so she's going to be like chill about it. Yeah.
But you're also saying by that her continued popularity may not be a sign of the reading audience's attraction to the providential vision that she has, or maybe it is, but subconsciously, right? You're saying that there are plenty of sort of superficial reasons to remain interested in Austen, as well as profound reasons, and is your position it's sort of difficult to sort out what that would mean for a certain culture to continue to be interested in her? because it could be for superficial reasons or for profound reasons.
Yeah, no, it could be. Yeah,
She's not Dostoevsky.
She's not Dostoevsky, right?
Profundity isn't on the surface.
Yeah, right. It's not. Nobody at the end of a Jane Austen novel falls right to the ground and kisses it and weeps. Nobody, right, has this sort of grand moment of like. Then I read the Gospel and the story of Lazarus jumped out at me. All these actually reasons that people think of Dostoevsky as artistically inferior, which I don't think he is, but it is right. It is kind of a common complaint in the criticism, right? Is there's just this very explicit Christianity there. And so it may be that right, Austen can appeal right to a broader audience because right, she is not preachy at all, right? But she is presenting, I think, deeply and profoundly admirable characters and a deeply admirable vision of love, which I do think that people find attractive. There's also, she's just really attentive to the profound injustices, both in terms of economics and also in terms of gender that women face in her time. And I think that kind of social criticism, at least, is something that our society, right, is able to appreciate and recognize, if we can't quite see, the providential element here, right, or the sense of openness to trust in God.
Thank you, Dr. Schubert. I wonder still, I'm getting converted here.
Is Austen
to
good?
Austen.
My work is done.
No, I wonder, though, if you could call her work as beautiful as works that do contain tragic elements that open up the abyss and that open up the possibility of restoration after the abyss. I don't know her canon well enough to address this. Are there novels? I've heard Mansfield Park might be the novel to read, but are there novels in which you see where you see the abyss open up and the kind of beauty that can come through suffering more than through happiness?
Oh, I mean, certainly, right, that growth and something beautiful can come through suffering, right, is very much a part of Austen's world. I think what we're told at the end of Persuasion, when Wentworth and Anne come back together, that their love is deeper, right, and more profound and more meaningful because of the suffering that both of them have undergone, right, the suffering of not knowing if you will be reunited with your beloved, and in fact believing that you will never be reunited with your beloved. And we're told that they're really an exceptional couple, right? The kind of connection that they share, the deep appreciation they have for each other's excellences, right? So the breaking between them, right, is a real break. I don't know that I would call it, right, necessarily tragic, but I do think that there's profound suffering. And almost all of her heroines, right, go through some kind of, right, stage of penitential suffering that then leads to growth, right? That Emma goes through a lot of it. Right? Like there's a kind of a sequence, right, of suffering that she is experiencing there. She has to be the suffering of being humiliated in a way, not necessarily publicly, but just humbled. I suppose it's probably a better word there that she has to undergo. Right? Lizzie having to confront being humbled as well, the fact that her judgment is not infallible and kind of suffering right through that. So, I think that Austen really, really understands the role that suffering plays in the maturation of the human heart and the maturation of virtue. Yeah, she's not going to take us into the absolute depths of the tragic abyss. I think that's fair. I think she gets us to infernal comedy. I think Lady Susan is a really deeply infernal comedy where the story is told from the villain's perspective. She's great. She's really funny and smart and clever and so totally, completely selfish. right? So it's like deep, right? It's deeply, deeply infernal. And there's infernal elements in Sense and Sensibility. I think Mr. Collins, maybe, a little bit. Marriage between Mr. Collins and Charlotte, right? Maybe, right? Has a kind of infernal dimension to it. I think, yeah, mostly, right, she is purgatorial. But then I do think that her endings get us into the paradiso realm. I really do, right? Into this vision of perfect happiness, right? Where the beautiful lady, right, does become, right, that vehicle of grace, right? And so does the man. So gosh, yeah, would she be, more beautiful? I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe that's the same question of Chaucer, right? Because Chaucer's not a tragedian at all. The Physician's Tale kind of tries, which is like a series of really sad tales, and eventually the host is like, please, God, stop. This is too depressing, right? I can't handle it. Yeah, so he doesn't go into the tragic realm. So I can see that's not there. And I guess maybe, right, I was going to say maybe, right, the sense of the sublime is kind of missing in Austen. Except that I do think she's got these moments of absolutely wondrous deliverance, where the characters think that they are imprisoned, and they think they are trapped, and they think there is no hope, and something happens, and yeah, right, it's a resurrection kind of a moment there, which has a tinge of sublimity, just a tinge. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the lecture, Dr. Schubert. You spoke of the soft-hearted love that the heroines have. I was wondering if you could speak to the more almost hard-hearted rejection and like almost deriding of love that we'll see in like Lizzie and sort of Emma, where it's like this, oh, he loves me, but I do not want anything to do with him. Like speak to that. Is that almost a flip side of this true love that every heroine has to go through in her novels?
So you're thinking about Lizzie maybe right after Mr. Darcy proposes?
Yes.
And she says no, absolutely not.
And kind of also a little bit before, too, where she sees him and she's like, wow, but also he has treated me in such a way that
Yeah, so do the heroines have to kind of undergo this period where they either despise, right, or don't love the hero?
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Let's see. Not all of them do. So Catherine Morland in Northanger Abbey, she falls in love with the hero pretty much right away. They dance together, and she's like, wow, he's so great. He's very funny. He's probably my favorite Austen heroine because he's just really snarky. So yeah, she doesn't have to there. Fanny in Mansfield Park has been in love with Edmund, her cousin. It's a little bit weird to us, but totally legit in Austen's time. From forever, it seems like. But yeah, Lizzie and Emma. I'm trying to think if, I guess Marianne too, right, with Colonel Brandon as well, right, do have to kind of go through that. And it seems like maybe the thing in common for all of them is this confidence in their own hermeneutics. Like, we are very good interpreters of reality, right? Lizzie thinks, I know how to read the world, right? I know how to read the human heart. I know how to read a social situation. I understand. Jane over here, right, is always, she's way too nice, and so, definitely right in comparison to Jane, right? I know what's what. And Emma too. I was like, right, I can read into the hearts of all peoples. I know their secrets, right? I know who's in love with whom, and I can orchestrate and manage their loves. Right? I can actually force people to get together in this kind of Machiavellian, she wants to impose form on matter type of a thing. Like, right, I will mastermind my world. I do think Austen, right, is getting, I think she is getting that deep, right, and that serious with them. And then I think similarly for Marianne, you have a character, right, who's like, I know the world. What is it? There is no such thing as second attachments, right? The human heart cannot cannot ever possibly love again, right? After the age of 17, first crush, right, done, right? I'm out, right? So this is her ontological, right, reality here. And I think, right, all three of them have to go through an experience or experiences, right, where that ontological confidence, right, or their own confidence, right, in their own hermeneutical ability to interpret the world around them is, right, deeply and profoundly demolished. They realize, oh no, I'm wrong. I'm so completely wrong. And that is, it's tied up in their experiences of love. Right? But Austen is doing so much more with the heroines, right, than, just like, who did they fall in love with? Right? But love has a profound educative power. Right? And one of the educative powers that love has, I think, is to possibly destroy these false illusions that they're clinging onto.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schubert. I was just wondering if you could speak a little more about one of Jane Austen's other very famous novels, Pride and Prejudice, and like the relationships going on and there, specifically between Lizzie and Mr. Darcy, and then Jane and Mr. Bingley. Because on the one hand, it seems like you have almost two knightly figures who have to both kind of undergo some sort of change, and then you have these two like static characters who are always kind of perfect, and then you have like Mr. Collins, who's just trying to do the proper thing, but like kind of fails.
Yeah, Mr. Collins. Think of Much Ado About Nothing, and Beatrice and Benedict are obviously the more interesting couple, right? Hero and Claudius are super boring. Claudius is just super annoying too. Really, not a big fan of him. But they're super conventional in a way, right? It's like, oh my gosh, love at first sight, right? I just beheld her, I love her. Also, I think she's very rich. I may or may not play a role in my love of her, right? But it's just they kind of do the basic courtly love thing, right? They're like, I see you, I love you, I must have you. Clearly, I need my friend to pretend to be me to woo on my behalf as well. And so I think there is a parallel in Pride and Prejudice. Jane and Bingley are, I think, much more interesting than Hero and Claudius, and I will defend Jane to the end. I'm a huge Jane fan. But they don't quite have the wit and the journey, the growth that Darcy and Lizzie go on. And I think that's a good way of putting it, right, that I think both Darcy and Lizzie kind of go on that knightly journey of, oh my gosh, I, again, was supremely confident in my own ability to read reality. I was supremely confident, right, in my own excellence, and I had to encounter a moment that unmanned me, right, unwomaned me, right, that revealed that I was not, the Machiavellian prince, right? That I thought I was, and then have to, right, learn and grow in Christian humility, right, in Christian charity and in Christian love, and then come together at the end there. Right? So I think that they do model that very kind of knightly journey. But both of them look up to the other. Both of them. So they're modeling that. Part of the chivalric tradition, right, is that the lady who is elevated above you, because you elevate her, as you elevate her, in longing to be like her, you do become a better person. You grow in virtue. And I think, right, for both of them, it is in part because they are elevating the other, right, that contributes to their growth in virtue there. I do think that Jane grows, right? She has that very bitter speech about Bingley's sisters, right? She's like, I won't trust them. You know, it seems like they're not entirely trustworthy or something, right? Something like very gentle and very demure, right, and very Jane-like, right? But Lizzie applauds it and thinks, good job, Jane, right? That's the most hateful thing that I've ever heard you say. I'm so proud of you. Right? So, I do think that Jane grows as well. But the more dynamic, exciting, yeah, kind of knightly growth is Lizzie and Darcy.
Maybe we'll have one more question after Dr.
I was interested in your glances towards Shakespeare and the Miranda loving Ferdinand so much that she wants to play the role of gentleman towards him, and that connection to you're seeing in Austen a kind of critique of the asymmetry of the courtly relationship coming to us from the medievals. And I wondered if you could comment on Shakespeare's cross-dressing heroine. It is that...
A particular one? Or?
Well, Portia comes to mind, but also Viola, who at one point says in kind of wondering amazement, "I am the man." That is Shakespeare doing the same thing? Is that with the cross-dressing heroine? Is Shakespeare doing the same thing that you're saying Austen is doing, where the lady takes on the knightly role, or is it something else, or something related, or what? Do you have any thoughts about?
Yeah, my first thought is Portia and the Merchant of Venice, right? Where she does cross-dress. She takes on the role. She takes on the role of the lawyer. And she enters into that infernal realm, right, where Shylock seems to be ruling, right, that infernal realm where law is king and there is no mercy and there is no grace, right? And so she kind of descends into that infernal state in the guise of the law, right? But in the guise of a man, and because she is in that guise, then she's actually able through some really legit cunningness to be able to rescue Antonio and Bassanio from Shylock there, right? So, yeah, I think that does. I hadn't quite thought of it in this way before, but I think it does enable Shakespeare to depict and celebrate female virtue and female courage, in a way. And that does seem to be something he's really good at, even when they're not cross-dressing. Right? I would say, someone like, a Cordelia, right, who is this, almost even stalwart, stoic, at times, kind of warrior soul, right, who's able to stand for the truth, right? She will not tell a lie, which is a very knightly thing, right? The knight is the one who defends the truth and is committed to the truth. But yeah, I think that it does seem like the cross-dressing, maybe the sort of, kind of carnival upending of things, right, allows these women to enter into these spaces that they wouldn't traditionally be able to enter into and restore things and set things right, and they're fully capable of doing it, and they're generally educating the men while they're doing it. Right, Portia is educating everybody in that play. Right, she is there.
Thank you, Dr. Schubert. My question was, what's the difference, or is there a difference, I guess, that we can learn from Jane Austen between the worship that a knight should give his lady and the lady should give her knight?
Mm-hmm. I don't think that she sees a great deal of difference there. I think in both cases, it's worship, admiration for, right, the profound goodness of the beloved. Right? So that, right, when Palamon says, right, is she a woman or is she a goddess? That is, maybe right, a little bit silly and can certainly become a little bit silly, but maybe right, there is in fact actually, right, something profoundly true about that vision of the human person. Right, they are human, and yet they are imago Dei, and that doesn't mean, certainly right for Austen, right, that it's idolatrous worship, right, but that it is this high reverence for the beloved and for the virtues of the beloved. And Austen does not see the virtues as gendered, and I think that's a big part of her project in giving women conventionally knightly virtues, is that, right, courage and constancy, and worship and service those are not gendered virtues. Now, they may manifest themselves differently in the social setting, for sure. And she's very aware of that, and she's not denying differences between men and women. Right? Men and women are different for Austen, and certainly she's living in a time with a very, very set social roles. So, for example, one of the great chivalric acts that Mr. Knightley performs in Emma is that he asks Harriet, who is a young ward, she's of the natural daughter of somebody, right? I think is the phrase there. She's snubbed by another man, Mr. Elton, who is a clergyman who is actually worse than Mr. Collins, morally speaking. She's snubbed by him, and Mr. Knightley asks her to dance, and it's a chivalric act there, right? And in that society, right, that is a particularly masculine kind of act to do, right? To ask a lady, right, to dance there. So I think she's going to see these things as being manifested, in particular ways. Anne Elliot, actually, she's going to go to sea with Wentworth. Right, she is going to go to sea with him, but presumably she is not going to be engaged in naval battles, in the plundering of French ships, or the directing of men, right, on that ship there, right? So the way that his courage manifests itself, I think, is going to be determined, right, by the social setting, right, by the social roles there. So it's going to outwardly look different, but I think she sees it as coming from the same place in the heart, or coming from the same kinds of virtues.
Okay, I encourage everyone to stay for refreshments and to discuss this talk further. And let's thank again Dr. Schubert.